Dan, thank you so much for joining. Today we are joined by Adam Branfman. He is the eBusiness Director at Atrium Innovations. They are a leading doctor-recommended vitamin and supplement brand category leader on Amazon. We also have Whitney Gibson, who is a partner and leader of Vorys eControl. They develop cutting-edge and cost-effective solutions to help brands control their sales in the digital age. And we also are joined by Zach Hintz. He's the president of Borderless Distribution. Borderless specializes in marketplace product prep, authorized seller networks, and D2C solutions. They process more than 1.5 million units each month via 6 locations around the world. So that's just a quick intro to these folks, and really looking forward to hearing that from them. As a quick reminder, the session today is being recorded, and we will send out this recording to all registrants and attendees later today. I encourage you to submit any questions you may have for our panelists. Go ahead and use the chat window or the Q&A window on the bar at the bottom of the webinar here, and I'll do my best to answer them as we go along. So really quickly, again, just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today, and with that, why don't we go ahead and get into this. So I think, we've had a lot of questions over the course of time that we've been doing this, and especially on these webinars. So maybe I'll turn it to you, first of all, Adam, since you are representing a brand yourself. And maybe we can just start this, I'm curious to know, how did you kind of come to this realization that control was going to be an integral part of your strategy for e-commerce? And, who was selling products on the marketplace? Why did you feel like you needed to get control? I guess a little bit of backstory there. I'd love to just help people understand that.
Yep, it's a great question. Thanks, John. So I'll start just by setting some context. I work for Atrium Innovations, and what Atrium Innovations is it's a very large company, a global leader in the development, manufacturing, commercialization of science-based nutritional health products, dietary supplements. And for a company and for brands like us, and our leading healthcare practitioner brand is called Pure Encapsulations, brand integrity and reputation and relationships with our professional customers, doctors, are critical. And for us, anything related to growth and strategy starts with our doctors, our healthcare practitioner channel. We sell our products directly to healthcare professionals, and we rely on them, most importantly, for brand awareness and for growth. And what we saw back, 8 to 10 years ago was a very significant problem with gray market distribution, specifically online, and product diversion. And this was really centered on Amazon, on the Amazon marketplace. And what was happening was it was damaging brand integrity, relationships with our doctors, the trust that those doctors had in us, the brand. And we knew at the time we had to do something to protect our business and to protect the long-term sustainability and health of our brands. And what was happening was just poor representation of our brands, of our products online, implications on regulatory concerns with regards to how the products were being represented. And what it was doing, it was undermining our doctors' ability to sustain their clinics and their practices, and it was impacting the trust that consumers and doctors had on us, the brand. And so we implemented a system of control, which I think, we're going to talk about a little bit later, but we really, in doing that, recognize the importance that, and the positive impact that control has on a business and on your ability to grow via e-commerce, giving consumers and patients access, but also strengthening and maintaining very strong relationships with the customers that matter the most, which in our case were those healthcare professionals.
I love that, Adam. Thanks so much. And man, there were a lot of really good nuggets in there that I'd love to kind of double click on. So specifically, I love this notion of coming up for air, understanding the true landscape, understanding who are truly your best customers and your best ambassadors for the brand, your best partners really outside of the you know, e-commerce kind of space, I guess, and really getting into that. And so maybe, yeah, maybe I'll just kind of switch because really those were the distributors of your product, right? Those doctors. And it looks like, you know, e-commerce was kind of creating a lot of havoc right there, right? So yeah, maybe, you know, from your perspective, Zach, you know, how does distribution, I guess, of products, both the theory of distribution as well as the actual practical applications fit into that story that Adam was just talking about?
Yeah, no, thanks, John. Yeah, it fits really well because, you know, if we think about it, you know, from Adam's perspective, or it could be another space, right? For him, it was doctors and physicians in a brick and mortar space, but it could be a retailer, right? It could be a boutique shop. There's a lot of channels that today companies and brands are trying to get in front of consumers and sell a product. And so when we think about distribution, you know, at a higher level in the e-commerce world, we want the experience that a consumer has online to be just as good as it is in store, especially right now with coronavirus, right? And so when we think about distribution, if we don't have a control on that, the problem becomes, you know, a brand can control what product the brick and mortar retailer gets, and then in essence can control what the consumer is getting. But when it comes to e-commerce, because it's a marketplace and there's a lot of sellers, they're getting inventory from multiple locations, that same control doesn't really exist in a traditional way. And so now you have consumers who could be getting a product from an authorized channel that the brand has agreed upon, or they could be getting it from someone who found inventory off the back of a truck, is what we like to say, right? And so that inventory could be old, right, or close to expired in Adam's case, and so the consumer's going to get a bad experience. The packaging could be old, and so it doesn't fit with your brand guidelines. I mean, there's a lot of things. The pricing could be off. I mean, there's so many things we could talk about where that consumer's experience on e-commerce would now be different than it is in store. And so without that control in your supply chain, which is what Borderless really focuses on, right? Shipping boxes in an authorized way for brands to consumers through e-commerce platforms. Without that, then you're just basically letting your consumers have multiple different experiences with the same product or same brand. And that is going to lead to some disruption and an inability to hold value over time, to keep your brand loyal, and to make sure that consumers come back over and over again.
Love it. So we've talked a little bit about kind of analyzing what's going on. We've talked about some practical implications or applications of how distribution might fit in. Let me come over to you for a second, Whitney. I mean, you deal with this a lot, and I think it feels like the net is like it's really hard for brands to figure this out on their own and to execute it their own. And then certainly there's some other, you know, frameworks that they may want to consider outside of just, for example, distribution. So I guess my question for you is really like, how do these brands, like Adam mentioned, and you certainly deal with a ton over at Voorhees, like how are you seeing them adapt from a best practice? I'm sure maybe even you talk around some of the ways that they're maladapting as well, but maybe just walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, a small percentage of brands will have leaders that will say in the early stages, when we were first getting involved in this area, they would say, look, I really think I can gain a competitive advantage in my particular market if I go and get really good control over the sales of my products online, and in particular, good control over the sales of their products on marketplaces. Because then when my sales team goes into their brick and mortar channels, they're not going to be undercut. They're not going to have the channel conflict. They're not going to have the variance in pricing going on in the marketplaces. And I remember a CEO of a large healthcare provider, it's actually my first client in this area, really grow their business and win in their category by being able to go into dermatologists and saying, we're the only brand that's just not looking the other way and dumping products out to distributors and retailers and looking the other way when it's diverted. We're going to really be aggressive on control. And they're able to just take away a lot of market share from their competitors by saying we're a controlled brand online. And as a lot of these doctors and spas or whoever in your category they're selling this, that was a real exciting thing for them to be part of a brand that had control. Now, the vast majority of people really get to control when they start to feel pain. when they start to feel their brick and mortar retailers saying, I'm not going to buy the same quantities from you. I want you to provide the products to me at lower prices. When the Amazon comes back and starts saying, look, we're demanding that you sell the product to us at a lower price, or other sorts of financial pain points are like, okay, this is really starting to be painful for our business. What do we do? And the first thing that we usually have to do when we're talking to a brand is sort of help them educate what gaining control really looks like in this age of e-commerce, and just help them understand that the way you went to market and how you distributed incentives to people that are buying from you to overbuy, sort of looking the way when there's diversion, when somebody was selling on the street in New York and diverting or dropping price, it just didn't impact their business. They did not feel pain because it didn't show up it didn't impact the person selling in LA. Well, with the marketplace model, it's now greatly accentuated the pain that businesses feel when they don't have good control over distribution, because their distribution issues show up in the marketplaces. Stated another way, I mean, Amazon and these marketplaces were able to really grow a lot by sort of playing over the lack of distribution control that brands have. They were able to go out to diverters and gray market sellers and people, even if the brand wouldn't sell to them, they would get all these diverters to sell online. They'd have them all compete against each other, drive down the price, which started to cause lots of pain for the business. So it's helping a brand understand the old level of control. I say it's like you were dressed for the summer, it's now become really cold. That level of protection is not going to work in this new environment. It's going to be painful for you. So then the question for the brand is, and we actually, we formed a team, which we sort of call the e-control foundational team. We said, before we get into enforcement, we'll get to enforcement in a second, you're going to need some compliance. But basically, we're going to have a channel management expert and the head lawyer that run this group look at your business, look at how you're going to market, look at your incentives, look at your policies, get an understanding and say, what are things that you need to do within your business practices and your policies to evolve, to get more control that's going to allow you to have the optimal control of sales online. And, it's not going out and a lot of times entering in agreements with every single person in your distribution. It's not always changing your business model. It's not changing all your incentives. But it's looking at a particular business, say, how can we gain just enough control that you can have control of your sales online? And it may be, let's put in reseller policies that tell people where they can sell. Let's make your claims against gray market a little bit stronger. Let's let's put in some practices so someone can't go and buy 50 products on your website when we know a consumer would only buy one. Like, let's put in some of these practices that give enough control in this new environment, so when we go out and enforce, we can actually solve the problem and not play whack-a-mole all day. But really, it's education, understanding why you must evolve to stop this pain, and then it's sort of going in, looking at how they're going to the market and saying, all right, where can we evolve your practices and your policies to gain more control as we go forward. So that's kind of a typical way I look at it, and a process that we go through when we're kind of taking brands through that evolution.
Thanks a lot, Whitney. And you said some really interesting things there as well. Like, I love this notion of how the world has evolved and how marketplaces have kind of challenged commonly held beliefs or prevailing wisdom in the industry. And I guess that kind of brings me a little bit more, maybe Adam, for you, as Whitney was kind of walking through this, I'm sorry I didn't advance the slide here, Whitney, but, maybe you can just speak to this graph just for a second, and I'll come back to this other notion of that prevailing wisdom.
Yeah, so, just briefly here, there's a lot of different ways that brands can go to market in the marketplaces. A lot of brands just see their products showed up organically with distributors and retailers and gray market sellers all sitting there competing with each other. They say, this is great. A lot of people are going and selling products on Amazon. But they quickly realize that strategy does not work for a lot of reasons, and including that you end up with negative reviews, you end up with no pricing, that it doesn't comply with your policies, it ends up causing channel conflict throughout your ecosystem, and just the fact that you're not going to grow very well. I explained it to people a lot. mean, our antitrust group would work with car manufacturers way before e-commerce to say, it's legal for us to only allow one dealer in a town, because if I have 10 dealers and they're all sitting on the same street selling my car, then all they're going to do, no one's going to work hard to increase the demand curve and try to convince people to buy my brand. They're just going to sit there and wait for traffic to come by and drop price. And I think a lot of people have to understand that in the marketplace. The value, is having a seller or someone that's motivated to do everything to increase your demand curve, to do the advertising, to run the content, to do the quality. Okay? If you just have a bunch of people sitting there waiting for the traffic that shows up and dropping price, you're not going to be near as profitable, and your revenues are not going to be, you're not going to be near as high on there. So then the question is, all right, how do I ideally want to go to market? So you move up, and when you move up here, the way this quadrant set up is, it's kind of based on how much control are you going to have as a brand and how much daily involvement are you going to have. So if you sell to Amazon retail, the thing about Amazon is they're blunt about it. We're not going to comply with any sort of pricing policies. We're going to track and follow, basically, if there's any sort of pricing fluctuation that's going on out there in the marketplace. Because more and more retailers are adopting price matching algorithms. So many brands find that there's always one person that's dropping here and there. And Amazon, I think I heard just recently that they're tracking every 14 minutes. They're looking for, tracking to see if there's a pricing violation going on. So it's very difficult if someone's selling 1P a lot of times for them to get pricing compliance on there. So some people will do the 1P and 3P approach. And then as you move up here, a lot of brands are going, to a model where they're selling through a pattern, or some other 3P seller that they trust will grow their brand, represent it well, will comply with their pricing policies. So they have somebody there that will give them more control over there. And then some brands, if they feel that they can do it and do it all in-house, then they'll try to do it on their own. So those are kind of the different ways that people go to market. And obviously it varies depending on the level of control and how much involvement the brand has.
Perfect. So I guess just getting back to that question we were mentioning earlier, I think this graph kind of shows the evolution of control. And like I said before, it feels like the prevailing wisdom really, before e-commerce was broad distribution helps you win, right? Stable base of predictable volume and revenue, stronger relationships, breadth. So Adam, in your case, the world you went to or the world you were at versus the world you went to, where you're controlling that distribution, you're limiting the number of sellers, which ultimately means you're having to turn down POs. How do you kind of get growth out of that? And again, it feels somewhat counterintuitive that you would turn away POs in order to grow your brand. Can you walk everyone through that a little bit?
Yep, sure. It's another good question. I think Whitney said one thing that is very true and very important, that e-control isn't about just online control. It's about implementing a holistic strategy for controlling your brand in every channel. It just so happens that the online channel is the one that presents the most risk to brands losing control. To your first question there, John, by turning down POs or by limiting your distribution in certain ways, that doesn't decrease the demand, because the demand will will always exist. And for us, where that demand is driven by professionals, by doctors, whether the actual purchasing happens through 1 or 2 online distributors or 200, the demand is always there. It's just a matter of what kind of experience those consumers have with your brand and with your products when they go to purchase them. And for us, that's what brand control is about. I often say that brand control is really the unsung hero of any growth-based strategy or any growth-based outcome that you hope to achieve. Because only once you control your distribution, your content, effectively enforce a MAP policy, can you then take the steps and implement the strategy, the commercial strategy, to actually grow your brand in an effective way. And for us, initially, brand control was not really about growth at all. It was about protecting the customers that we valued the most, which is our doctors, to enforce those relationships and reinforce those relationships and strengthen them so that we could protect the long-term sustainability of our business. And it was about brand integrity. The idea that, for brands like us, or for direct-to-consumer brands, you want to be in the driver's seat of the experience that your consumer is having. And for us, that happens in two ways. It happens through doctors who want to feel confident when they're recommending a product, when they're educating a patient about a product or about one of our brands. And it happens online through a platform like Amazon, for example, where we're educating the consumer ourselves, or in this case, through Pattern, about our brand and products. And if you're not doing that in a controlled, effective, deliberate way, you run the risk of losing brand integrity. And like I said before, in 2015, 2014, we had over 300 third-party gray market Amazon resellers. They were all selling our products. In our catalog for Pure Encapsulations, we have about 600 products. There were over 30,000 unique listings set up for our products, all with different content, most of it not regulatory compliant. Most of it, did not originate from us, the brand. And we initiated a process to consolidate our distribution to a small group of trusted sellers who properly managed the content, and like Zach said, gave a uniform, standardized experience to consumers, no matter where they were purchasing it, whether they were purchasing it in a doctor's office or in a health food store, or a pharmacy or online on Amazon. We wanted that experience to be uniform, and that's what we did. It was an e-control framework leveraging, a lot of what Whitney is talking about, to more effectively manage distribution, to effectively manage control over who was reselling online, map policy, and then finding a partner to help us to control our content and Pattern. What it did was it established transparency and trust with our doctors as well as our patients when they went to purchase our products directly online.
Hey, John. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I always find this topic interesting of how does control equal growth. And, sometimes I think it helps to just, at least for me, to think about sort of at a very nuts and bolts level. We had at our conference a representative from a leading retailer, and she basically said, here's how it works. If someone comes in, they see our product here, and they pull up their phone, and they show that the product is available for a much lower price. We enter all that into our database, and then when we meet with the brand, if they don't have good control online, we tell them they're not going to get optimal shelf space any longer. We're going to promote the brands that have good control. We tell them we want to carry less products. We ask them to lower their price, period. On the flip side, if a brand walks into us and says, look, you're not going to have people just pulling up your phone saying I can find it for cheaper or find it somewhere else online, and they have a decent product, then we're much more likely to buy from them as opposed to their competitors, often give them better pricing, better promotion, better shelf space, and sort of lean into that brand. So I've seen presidents of multiple companies and business units that aren't driven by their own e-commerce incentives or their own sales incentives, the brick and mortar channel, but are looking at the overall growth saying, if I can get really good control online, I can go grow by taking a lot of money from a lot of share from my competitors in those brick and mortar retailers. Then you turn around on the e-commerce channel and you look at Amazon, and if I want to beat my competitors in selling on Amazon, it's like, what levers can I pull? Well, I've got to be able to run really good I need someone to run really good advertising. I need someone to win in SEO. I need someone to invest a lot in content. I need someone to drive a lot of traffic to the ASIN. if I got a bunch of people that are all sitting there and I don't get control, then no one's motivated, no one's going to invest in doing that. But if I have a partner like a Pattern and they're getting 95% of the sales, and now they go throw the gasoline on all these demand generating things, now my brand really starts to grow and I'm taking traffic away from my competition. So I really think that, just from a strategic point of view, the brands that do really well today use it as that sort of fulcrum to basically drive their growth, both on the e-commerce channels and drive it in the really drive it in the brick and mortar channels.
Perfect. So many good comments that are putting here. So if you're listening to the recording or if you're listening not live right now, I think hopefully you've taken some good notes, because again, I'm hearing some great bombs of knowledge being dropped here. I think the notion that you mentioned, Adam, of really being in the driver's seat as a brand and kind of shaping your own destiny is really important. I love the notion of, demand doesn't change just because you broaden the distribution network. The demand is still there. It's just the experience that you want for the rest of your channel partners and certainly for the consumers themselves. So really salient points here. And then Whitney, certainly, from your perspective, I think you've seen a lot of people do this well. You've seen it not done well. And I'll just remind everyone, if you're listening live, go ahead and feel free to submit some questions. And I'm going to try to weave some of them in, because we have received a number of questions as we've been going along here. And, maybe I'll tie these first two questions, I'll read them aloud, and then let's tie them into some of the mistakes that some people make when implementing control, because it feels like, in order to do this well, you kind of have to, I don't know if I want to call it like the fight or flight instinct that every brand kind of has. It's like the prevailing wisdom that I talked about earlier. You kind of have to figure out a way to suppress it and not do almost what your gut would tell you to do. It's a brave new world. So, two of the questions. One is, can brand control or e-control at least on sales, negatively impact the sale of clearance items? So it's almost like in this brave new world, and maybe you can speak to some of your experience with some massive CPGs on this front, Whitney. I know that we've spoken before in abstracts around this kind of discounting policy and training the customer through discounts. What happens if that goes away, or what, do you end up with a bunch of inventory that you can't get rid of? So how does it affect that? The second one, it says, limiting distribution can limit exposure on a new brand. How does utilizing limited distribution on a product get the exposure for a brand that they need in terms of more consumer exposure to generate the volume necessary? So I think there's two things here. One is brand control going to negatively affect this natural cadence of discounting or clearance items? And two, is control going to limit the distribution that would be necessary to get awareness of the brand? So maybe you can speak to both of those.
Yeah, sure. So, when I look at like what is when we talk a lot about what is e-control, the way I define it is sort of protecting your brand equity and helping a brand reach optimal distribution in the age of e-commerce. And optimal distribution for most brands does not mean 100% implementing every single control lever that exists. Brands do engage in clearance. Brands do engage in promotion. The way I view it a lot when I'm talking to a brand is, you want to take your levels of control up right to the point where the benefits that you're getting from the control outweigh the burden and cost that brand is incurring by implementing those controls. But if it starts to get to a point where, for example, most brands are not going to go and say, I need all my, let's say I got 1,000 distributors and they're selling to 100 sellers each. I'm not going to go get every distributor to sign up to an agreement. I'm not going to get every distributor to ask the people they're signing up to an agreement. The burden on the organizations, the cost of doing that is far, that's far greater than the benefits that I'm going to get, the benefits that I'm going to get on doing that. So on the clearance items, are those items where I would discuss, is this an item where controlling the price is really important? online today? Or is this a SKU or a set of products that it really isn't important this way? It's going to be discontinued. We've got a new thing that's coming out. So you'd have to analyze it on a very fact specific situation. And then you'd have to look at, all right, if a retailer is going to go and they're going to liquidate these products or they're going to clear them out, is that something we're really trying to hold price and map online? How much volume is that going to be? What sort of impact? And you have to always assess, like, okay, if I went to that retailer and I said, no, I want to buy those back, or I want to put a prohibition on you clearing those items, okay, is the burden or cost of doing that, how does that compare to the impact that's going to have on the brand? And you got to make those judgment calls that you can in doing that. Same thing with this question about limiting distribution and exposure to a new brand. Again, you got to weigh sort of, a lot of times limiting distribution, it depends what we mean by limiting distribution. If we're talking about limiting distribution on Amazon, that doesn't really have an impact on limiting because it's a vertical channel. And so if you got one seller or you got 10 sellers, that doesn't really impact the exposure of your particular product. If you're talking about, having sellers in different regions, and that's important to get it to your end consumers, then yeah, you don't need to limit it down to one or two distributors in necessarily that case. So there is a channel management strategy that you have to think of your brand. How do I reach? We have you heard Denise Zamuda on our team. She's a channel management expert. I mean, you got to think about, how do I get my products in the end consumer's hands? What are the best ways to do that and distribute your products proportionally? And we have a lot of brands that have 1,000 distributors, and they still are able to get control of their sales on products online. So I don't think you necessarily have to always limit. You don't have to limit it down to a point that you're not getting the products and the exposure that you want. In order to get control at the end of the day. But I do think that for a lot of brands, there's just a process too that you have to go through. I mean, when I first started off in this, I used to think to myself a lot, like, this brand's not really doing everything up front that I think they should be doing in order to get control. So I don't know if I really want to work with them. I mean, the policy, they're just putting this policy in place. They want me to sling a bunch of C&D letters. I think they should think about changing their incentives. I think they should think about changing their promotional strategy. But as I've gone on more and just worked with so many brands over the years, what I've seen is that a lot of times things have to be done in steps, and trust has to be built up. We have to show the brand a lot of times that, look, let's put in this base policy. Let's do some basic enforcement and show we're going to move your ASP maybe from $50 below MAP to $20 below MAP. And in doing that, you're not going to experience a volume loss in sales, and you're actually going to start to see some happier retailers and distributors, and you're going to experience some good experiences, increased sales over there. Once you show them some positive results and they start to see the benefits of control, now they really trust us. And now they say, well, how do we get that last 20%? Well, let's start to look at this point, maybe our root cause team has figured out that it's actually, people are buying directly on this promotion you're running on your website. And why don't we stop that too for one promotion? We can get you that last little bit. So I think what I've realized more and more as I've gone along in this is there's a journey and trust you build up. You don't always have to go from no control to all the control levers. And that a lot of times you can start with certain foundational things, really improve where the brand's at, and then kind of get there over time. All along kind of thinking about, what's that, we have clients a lot that say, if you ask me to really vet who I'm selling to, that's like McDonald's taking away their Big Mac. We're a direct selling company. We sell to every single person with hardly any vetting. And I'm like, well, we'll be doing enforcement forever for you. And they're like, yeah, that's fine. Okay. That's the way they're operating their business. Other brands say, you know what? We want to get agreements with everybody, change our incentives. We want to stop our promotions and get it and basically cut down on our enforcement budget. Okay. And so I do think you just kind of got to figure out, what is your optimal distribution, and then kind of wrap the controls around that makes sense.
Awesome. Well, thanks for walking through that and answering some of those questions. We have a handful of other questions as well, and so maybe we'll just shift gears a little bit and continue to answer. If you do have questions, you're on the call, feel free to submit them, and I think we'll kind of use some of the time that we have left to keep going through. If we have extra time, we can get to the kind of program questions we had in advance. One of the questions that came up is, what are the pros and cons of working with a 3P partner like Pattern versus becoming the 3P seller ourselves? And I'll just say, I've seen people obviously be successful at both. I think generally you just have to take a hard look in the mirror and look at your core competencies and what you are really good at and what you want to be good at. We see a number of brands that are actually decent at Amazon, but then comes in eBay, then comes in Walmart.com, then comes in the international sites, and to be able to have a true core competency for e-commerce across all of these marketplaces and maintain the control that we've been talking about, and ultimately get to the growth, I found very few that are really good at it. But I think it's just part of that long-term strategic planning. I think the other thing is, especially on Amazon, is Amazon going to allow you to be your own 3P seller? Many of the bigger brands, they'll enforce the standards for brand selling on Amazon policy and disallow you from actually running your own 3P store on Amazon. And so that's always a risk. We've seen a lot of brands invest massive resources to try to get that off the ground, only to have it kind of getting down from under them. So I think that's the kind of second consideration. And the third, I would say, is just, the cost for sure. Everything that we do for a brand, from the product photography to the SEO, to the advertising management, to the customer service and review management, to forecasting, to everything else that we do. And certainly, Zach, I'll get to you in a second, because I think you're going to have an opinion on whether or not brands can do this. The moving boxes and logistics and fulfillment themselves. It costs us, around 11% of revenue to do all of those different services. And so if a brand is going to do that, 11% might be not a lot, and it might be a lot of money, depending on how big that brand is. And generally, what I look at it is not, the actual cost right now. Can I do it for 10% today? Can I do it for 9%? But what is the opportunity cost? Because if Pattern is able to grow our brands on average, are growing, up to 50%, in their first year with us, it's how fast can you grow the brand? And if you've got, data scientists, and you have technologists, and you have people who have been brand managers and category managers at Walmart and at Amazon that are really being tasked with your business and growing it, generally we found that we can grow a brand a lot faster than they can grow it themselves. Even if they're already growing 20, 30, 40% a year, we generally are able to arbitrage, given our experience and our maniacal focus, to grow that faster. So there's a myriad of factors, and I'm not here to say, we can do it better than anyone else in-house. I think those are just a number of factors that I would personally consider. And the second thing, the final thing that I would say that many brands don't consider, but it's more and more apparent, is, when you work with something like a Pattern and we're buying your inventory from you, we become a revenue center for your company. And it's just, we're an influx of cash for the company. When brands try to do this on their own, they get perceived as a cost center. And so I think even the people with good intentions that are trying to run this business internally, they're constantly, management might be looking, or the board or investors or whomever might be coming in and trying to say, how can we do this cheaper? How can we take away resources? And what we end up finding is that they're just not staffed. Whereas if it's a revenue center, then the best business is generally aligned to say, how can we get more revenue out of Pattern? If we're growing those brands, we like to say sometimes brands come to us generally for control, but they stay with us because of the growth. And so I think those are just a number of factors to kind of consider. Zach, I'm interested to hear from your perspective, though. You certainly run into a lot of brands that may try what you're doing themselves, and we certainly work very closely with your organization on everything that we do, from a fulfillment, logistics, shipping, returns, all that sort of stuff. Can you speak to that a little bit on whether or not, outsourcing versus insourcing kind of argument?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think a lot of times, especially when you're in the brand seat, you're trying to cut costs, right? You're trying to find, I think we can do this more efficiently. I know when I was running e-commerce for a brand, I think our biggest challenge kind of came down to manufacturing and distribution, just because I can get the sales team bought in, I can get, the marketing team bought in, just depending on where you sit. But sometimes it's really difficult to get that distribution piece kind of nailed down. And so a lot of brands that come over and use Borderless, what they're finding is, one, they're not getting all the chargebacks, right? Because Amazon, if their warehouse processes something incorrectly, then they're going to get charged for that. And Amazon's going to make them pay to redo the work at their facility. But then on top of that, those are some basic things. Moving at another level, talking more about control, what we offer is the opportunity to bundle, to kit, to bring two different items in your catalog together to make a product that doesn't exist in a normal channel. And it allows you to grow more. It allows you to offer new listings and products to your consumers that are not necessarily available in retail. And, a lot of brands actually use it as a testing center. Do these two things make sense together? And if it does, then I'm going to introduce it to brick and mortar. And so there's just a lot of opportunities to create that control. And I want to be super clear. When I say control, what I mean is a lot of these sellers who are third party on platform, their goal is just to find inventory for cheap, put as little cost into it as possible. Literally just let me put an Amazon label on it, and then let me send it in, and I'm going to make a quick buck, right? And so you've got a lot of pass-through sellers that I'm sure Whitney and Adam are both very aware of that get super annoying. And so when you do something like, oh, I'm going to add a new step to this product for e-commerce, like make it a multi-pack or bundle it, or add a prep process procedure, like put it in a poly bag, et cetera, then all of a sudden I'm differentiating that product. And it makes it harder for some random person just to find it and list it on Amazon, because now they have to go and invest in your retail inventory to pull it together and make a multi-pack, or to put it in a poly bag. And so it's not as appealing, right? It's less margin for them. They're going to move on. And so it gives you a little bit more protection. So when you think about doing that internally from a distribution perspective, you just have to ask, is my manufacturing facility able to adapt to how Amazon and other marketplaces want the inventory to be received with different labels than normally is seen in brick and mortar? And two, can they do these things that can help me control the platform more?
Love it. A lot of good insights there, Zach. Appreciate you weighing in on that. Adam, maybe I'll come back to you. There's another question here that I think is apropos for your experience. The question is, will working with an exclusive 3P seller upset my other distributors/resellers who are already on Amazon? How do you mitigate the damage to existing customers? So when we started working with you, obviously there were a lot of other sellers on the platform. You guys went through that, painful process, honestly, from probably a number of different perspectives of that cleanup. How did you mitigate the damage to existing customers that were already selling on Amazon, or how did you kind of think through that trade-off of going virtually exclusive?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think my best answer to that is, if you have to understand what your business and what your brand's objectives are. And for us, it was about, and continues to this day to be about, sustainable growth, control of our brands, to protect brand equity and brand integrity. And at the end of the day, you have to find the right partners and align with the right partners who also believe in those same core values. And at the end of the day, you can't please everybody. There will be, and for us, there certainly were some online distributors, Amazon 3P sellers, who, were not happy about the control levers that we pulled and mechanisms that we put into place. But at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, did they have the same and align with the same core value we did around content and premium brand integrity and equity and quality control and consumer experience, and do what's right for your brand and do what's right for your customers? And for us, that was about making strategic decisions when it comes to controlling your brand online and controlling your distribution. And this came up in one of the questions that I think somebody asked just a few minutes ago, was, the idea of limiting distribution, and does that limit access for consumers? And limit your ability to spread your brand out through many different channels. And I don't like to think of it as limiting your distribution. I like to think of it as strategic distribution. And like Whitney said, you're identifying the channels that you want to play in, and finding the right partners within those channels to capture the demand that exists there and to grow the demand in those channels.
I love it. I love that concept of strategic distribution versus limited distribution. I think I've heard you say before as well, Adam, that like kind of taking a hard look at who really is a partner, right? I think you guys maybe even got rid of some doctors that weren't even doctors selling in their clinics anymore. They had just gone full e-commerce, and really kind of having to take a hard look and say, like, are those really the types of medical professionals we want representing our brand that aren't even, talking to customers on a day-to-day basis, and they're representing, or at the very least, I've heard other brands say these really weren't the type of channel partners we wanted. They were arbitraging, they were lowering the price, they weren't adhering to MAP. They were buying a lot of product, but that doesn't necessarily make them a good customer for us. So I just love that notion of strategic distribution versus limiting distribution. I think it's really on point.
John,
another question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing on that question that Adam addressed, and that is, on what do you do to make sure you don't upset these other distributors or people that we're selling on there? One of the things that we've done often is just pull the data on the volume of sales that those other distributors and retailers, and bring that into the brand that we're working with. And most of the time, those distributors and resellers are getting such a small percentage of the overall sales, and their volume is really small, that quickly the brand sees that having that distributor not sell on there really isn't that big. It's not near as big a deal. It's easy for them, a visceral reaction, to say, I don't want to have to go tell you that distributor to sell. But when they're dividing up those sales among everyone else, they're usually selling such a minuscule amount. And then the other thing is, we usually when we're working with the brand, create a number of talking points to help the distributors and resellers explain why this is ultimately going to help them sell in the channels that they're specialized to sell in much easier and better long term. And if we allow them and everybody else to compete on there, then ultimately their primary business model and their channels is going to be undercut by all those issues that are occurring on the marketplace. So I think there's sort of data and good communication strategies. Most brands can easily sort of work with their own distributors and resellers to help them understand the new way that they want to go market on the marketplaces.
So two other good questions that have really come about that I want to make sure we have a chance to answer before we run out of time here. And maybe Whitney, I'll have you kind of weigh in here as well. So the first one is, Amazon 1P is a huge customer for us. We've been using them for years. We want control, but what would you say to brands who are nervous to cut off this massive customer all at once?
Well, I think that there's different ways there's different ways that you can look at going to market on Amazon. You can look at going with a 3P. You also can look at a borderless type model, where we see a lot of brands where if they feel Amazon is going to basically not allow them to sell as a 3P or sell themselves, then they'll look more at a borderless type model where they're going to distribute their products through a number of sellers that are going to sell on there that they basically trust will comply with MAP. And then really go in and get good control of their distribution. I mean, even if you go with the 3P seller or sell your own, Amazon will suppress your buy box if you don't have good enough control. So, where I see the model break down, and it sounds self-serving, but I've seen people go from 1P because they're upset about the lack of MAP compliance to try the 3P model. And if they don't have a good plan for control, they end up devastated, because now the e-commerce team is not getting near the percentage of sales on the marketplace that they were. And then they end up with their sales taking a big nosedive, and then they're upset. But if you have a good plan for getting control, Because if you go from getting 95% of the sales, Amazon will drop price to take the buy box and they'll get 95% of the sales. And then if you go and try to sell yourself at MAP, but you're not able to control the rest of the marketplace, you may go down to 40% of sales. And that's why I think, you guys, Pattern, and has invested so much in the controls and really trying to bring that to brands. And because that's key to making that model work. It's like you have to invest in that control to be able to get the percentage of sales you need, to be able to sell at the price you want, and to be able to pull the levers to drive growth. So, I say that there's sort of there were sort of the 4 Ps of marketing, but sometimes I'll say that, look, in the e-commerce world, there's kind of a C before the 4 Ps, and it's control sort of a predicate to be able to pull all the levers around price and product and promotion and those sorts of things. That if you don't have that predicate in place, you can't even start working on those levers.
That's a good point. I think the other thing that I would raise on this front that came in the question was really, what would you say to brands who are nervous to cut off this massive customer all at once? And I would just say from our experience, we've had multiple brands from doing $2 million a year on Amazon to, close to $100 million a year on Amazon. They don't always move at once. And in fact, it's not always the best recommendation to move everything at once. So there's absolutely a way to move in stages, whether it's a new product launch, a new product introduction, a very high margin product that you're losing velocity or you're losing margin on. There are ways to segment your own portfolio to your advantage. And it goes back to Adam's earlier comment of staying in the driver's seat and not being a victim. We see so many brands that I feel victimized by someone like Amazon, and it could be substitute whatever marketplace player there, that they're dictating the terms of the brand's strategy on e-commerce. And it should always be the other way around. I call it the reverse crap out. Instead of waiting for Amazon to tell you your products are unprofitable, you go to Amazon and you say, I'm not profitable selling to you 1P. I'm going to take Stuff Matters into my own hands. And I like the reverse crap out move because it puts you back in the driver's seat. And whether you're selling through an exclusive seller like us, whether you're using an authorized distribution network, like Borderless offers, there are a number of different ways to get there, but I think that's that tactical approach and getting back in the driver's seat. So we probably have time for one more question, maybe two. But let me go back to this other one here, which is, what is the silver bullet that gets people in organizations to see that you don't lose control to a 3P seller? How do you get your teams to see this as a good solution when they resist out of concerns for their own existence? And I think that's a common question. It's a great, very great worded question there as well. Whitney, what would you say? I mean, you probably talk to a lot of brands that are going through some version of transitioning to hybrid or to a 3P or to their own 3P or to an authorized network. Like there probably is some level of, I'm going to lose control if I do this. What do you say to them? I'm sure there's no silver bullet, but how do you help them through that process? You probably feel like a therapist at some point.
Yeah, maybe this question's zeroing in. Like, let's say someone's running the Amazon account and they're having a deep relationship with Amazon 1P, and do they feel like if they go to a 3P that they're going to be, they're not going to have the same value as they did? We have a woman on our team now, Robin Gable, who was head of e-commerce, and she was working with Amazon, and then decided to go and work directly with a 3P. And the brand, you could talk to her and ask her, but basically I think what happens a lot is that person then gets to sort of be a part of your team, working with all the expertise and use the data insights and use all the strategies, and really they think about their products and the strategies around promotion, and you become this kind of cohesive team that's working together to build your brand. It's no different than when I heard someone the other day at P&G was saying, look, we get really good control. We go in, and then we're really growing is we're forming very close partnerships with our retailers and using the data that they're collecting, what they're learning, and using what we know about our products. And so we're leveraging each other's expertise to grow these brands together. And I mean, I hear people talk about that. I mean, so I think it's the same thing. You guys have all these data scientists, you're collecting all this data, you have all this technology, this advertising, these, ability to take, the high value content. Well, then they bring all the expertise around their brands and what they're seeing. And then you're kind of leveraging each other's expertise to grow it together. So I don't think it's a zero sum game. I think it's more of a, they still adding their expertise and then bolting on the expertise of 3P seller. And now you just have a much more powerful, growth engine going on. I mean, Adam, you've sat in that seat. I mean, John, you sat in that seat. I mean, maybe you could explain kind of what it feels like when you're a brand in that situation.
Yeah, I can add some comments here. I think that, a 3P seller, in the model that Pattern uses, they become an extension. They become a specialized player as an extension of your own brand and your own business. Yes, they're a third party, but they act and operate as an extension of your own business, aligned with your same core values and beliefs and priorities and objectives, in a way that's much more deeply embedded with your brand than the alternative, which would be a 1P, at least in the case of our business. I can't speak for everybody's, brand, but at least for ours, when for us, how we define control as distribution control, map policy control, content control. And those three pillars for us, we rely very, very heavily on a specialized partner like Pattern to help us achieve control in this way, as an extension of ourselves. Because we're not good in these things. We don't specialize in e-commerce. We don't specialize in content or SEO or advertising or the Amazon marketplace. You need a partner that can be an extension of your own business. And for us, that's the silver bullet. Without that, that just doesn't exist.
I
love it, Adam. Well, sorry to cut you off, Whitney. I know we're at time, so I just wanted to respect everyone else on here and know that we'll have some follow-up here. But if anyone has any other questions, feel free to reach out directly to us on our website, pattern.com. You can reach out directly to me if you want, john@pattern.com. Wanted to thank Adam Branfman for joining us today, and Whitney Gibson from Voorhees, and certainly Zach Hintz from Borderless for joining us today. And like I said, we'll be sending out the recording a little bit later. So I wanted to appreciate and send some gratitude to everyone who joined us today. I know it's a crazy time right now, but hopefully the economy will start opening up again and we'll be able to get back on track with all our businesses. So thanks again for joining, everyone, and we'll catch you again soon on the next one.